Welcome to our third lecture on supply and demand. This will actually be the last part of the lecture on demand. After this, we're going to move on to supply and analyze that part of the market. But let's get into right up where we left off last lecture. So in a previous lecture, we talked about price being the most important determinant of quantity demanded. In other words, when price went up, quantity demanded went down, and vice versa. When price went down, quantity demanded went up. And we talked about that as being a movement along a single demand curve. Well, when one of the non-price determinants affects markets, we're no longer talking about a change in quantity demanded, a movement along a single demand curve. Now we're talking about a change in demand. So it's vitally important that you understand the difference between a change in quantity demanded caused by a change in the price in the market for any item, good, service, resource, and a movement along a single curve, and a change in demand which is caused by one of the non-price determinants affecting markets. So here we've drawn an increase in demand. So assume we started at D, demand curve D, and the arrow indicates that the curve is shifting right towards D1. So any increase in a curve is always going to be a rightward shift. Any increase in a curve is going to be a rightward shift. So what would cause demand to increase? What would cause it an increase in demand? Well, let's talk first about number one up there, buyer's income. Assuming we're talking about a normal good, right? So remember, as long as this is a market for a normal good, right, an increase in buyer's income would increase demand, shift the demand curve to the right, right? So for instance, if we were talking about automobiles, brand new automobiles, those are definitely normal goods. So an increase in buyer's income tends to increase the demand for automobiles. Right? Taste and preferences. Well, the McConnell book spends a good deal of time on corn. Well, imagine if you picked up the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the Chicago Tribune, whatever it is you get your news source from tomorrow morning, and it says that eating corn decreases your chance of cardiac disease by 35%. Well, in general, people would read this and say, hey, it's worth buying and eating more corn. So that would simply increase the demand for corn based on taste and preferences for corn. So anytime people want more of an item just based on the perceived taste preferences, happiness it yields, or the reality that it might be better for you, that's going to increase demand. What about number of buyers? Well, here's one we can talk about. We'll probably get more into this when we actually bring supply and demand together and talk about the long-term effects of this policy. But imagine if there was the corn market. You know, the corn market was rather easy and quite boring to analyze for a long time because you only really had two sets of buyers in the corn market. You had people like you and I who bought corn. We bought corn to cook with or for corn on the cob and such. And then you had producers who needed corn for corn feed for their animals or corn as part of an additive to make another food item. Now along comes the ethanol policy of George Bush, where all of a sudden we're going to start making a biofuel out of corn. So imagine the number of buyers in that market, in the corn market, when we introduce ethanol as a bio-based fuel, as sort of a substitute for gasoline. There's a huge increase in the number of buyers. So there's going to be a shift, a rightward shift, an increase in the demand for corn. Right? Now substitutes. If there's an increase in the price of a substitute, there will be an increase in the demand for the specific item you're trying to analyze. So let's make an assumption for a minute. Let's assume that corn and, say, potatoes are substitutes. So what happens in the market for corn if the price of potatoes goes up? Well, obviously, if there's an increase in the price of potatoes, there's going to be an increase in the demand for corn, right? Now, you look and say, well, we have two number 4s here. We must have made a mistake. Well, it's not a mistake. On a previous slide, we talked about the 5 non-price determinants, and one was price of related goods, and we lumped substitutes and complements into one category. So therefore, we have substitutes as one, number 4, and complements as another. Well, it's difficult to come up with a complementary good for corn, but let's talk about maybe the iPods and the iPod apps. What happens in the market for apps or applications for your iPhone if the price of the iPhone goes down? Now here, be careful. We're trying to analyze the market for iPhone applications. So what happens in the market for applications if the price of a complementary good, a good used in conjunction with that good, the iPhone, goes down? Well, if there's a decrease in the price of one part of the complement, there's going to be an increase in the demand for the other. And then we simply have expectations. Expectations about future product price, expectations about future product availability, and expectations about future income. Well, expectations about future price is the easiest one. If you assume that the price of a good or service will be higher in the future, say, 2, 3, 4 months from now, there's going to be an increase in demand for now, because buyers are going to try to rush out and purchase this item before the price of the good or the service or the item goes up. So if we expect higher future prices, increase in the demand today in the market for now, right? What about product availability? Well, we're going to look and see about, say, all right, well, what happened in 1999 when people were worried that because of the Y2K problem, a lot of computers might be offline for quite some time. So when we analyze what happened for the market for basic rationing items like gasoline, food, milk, butter, the last week of 1999, there was a huge increase in the demand for these items because people were rightfully worried that maybe if the system was not available immediately after New Year's Day 2000, that we wouldn't be able to process a lot of the purchases of goods and services, so they wouldn't be able to pick up items that they necessarily needed, right? And then expectations about future income. Typically, when buyers feel pretty good about their future income, they tend to increase the demand for goods or services or whatever it is they're buying today. So an increase in an expectation of higher income in the future, that's going to increase demand today.